All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Dan Kelemen. I'm a McCourt Chair and the Associate Dean for Faculty at the McCourt School of Public Policy here at Georgetown. And it's my great pleasure to be here at the Mortara Center to introduce my colleague, Professor Ning Leng, who has just published a terrific book, which I had the pleasure of reading in earlier stages, and it's nice to see it in physical form now. Let me just do some quick introductions, and then I'm going to hand things over to her to do a presentation, then we'll have a little discussion and bring you in to the discussion as well. So Professor Leng is assistant professor at the McCourt School here at Georgetown. She specializes in the political economy of China, and her work really spans both domestic politics of China and sort of the role of China on the global stage in political economy terms. Domestically, she's done a lot of work on different ways that the Chinese state tries to control different aspects of society, including business, our topic today, but also academics, and even the way higher levels of the government control government officials lower in the hierarchy. And her book, which I'll say something about in a second, is the culmination of some of her most important work on that topic. Then the second strand, she's doing this fascinating work, including her new book project, more on, let's say, global China, China's role on the world stage, where she, in particular, has been focusing on China's engagement in the global south. And a lot of people, of course, there's been a lot of work on China's role in Africa and investment, and people talk about Belt and Road and everything, but she has really dug into China's role in South America, which has been less explored, and done amazing field work, which I'll ask her a little bit about in the Q&A there, looking at sort of investment decisions and that sort of thing. Now, just quickly, a couple words about her book. I'm not going to say much because she's going to give you a little presentation on it. But this is really just a terrific contribution to the literature on Chinese government business relations and on the process of politicizing business. And really what she's done is to look at a couple forms of politicization that I think existing literature had overlooked, really, and looking at how Chinese state officials get firms to contribute to their agenda, right? That is the officials' agenda. And she looks at two particular forms, how they pressure and elicit from firms contributions to what she calls visibility projects, these kind of large-scale public projects that advance the careers of politicians. And then secondly, how they use firms as a way to help manage public protests and thus contribute to regime stability. And she does this in this book through just an incredible combination of field work with interviews. It's done in a very challenging context, obviously, for that kind of work, as well as data gathering and statistical analysis to bolster these findings. And putting all that together, it's just a wonderful contribution. And please join me in welcoming her and congratulating her.
Thank you.
All right, over to you, and I'll take a seat, and then we'll talk a little later.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan, for such a generous introduction. And I'm very excited to be here. A lot of you here have inspired me in my work and gave me support along the way. So I'm very happy to report that there is a final product. And I will tell you a little bit about this book. So as Dan mentioned, this book is about how the Chinese state politicized business and what is the outcome of that politicization, both to the firms and to larger developmental and infrastructure outcomes. So let me start with the background of this book's research. It is often argued that in China's political economy model, the Chinese state and the private sector has found a stable and mutually beneficial way to coexist. Therefore, 35 years of high-speed growth, therefore a lot of private investment in the country. On the side of the party state, we have a large literature describing how they reached this, kind of equilibrium. The state did a lot of effort in building a socialist market economy. They did legal reforms to smooth the transaction side of state business relations. They streamlined the bureaucratic processes to a certain degree to make licensing and business process generally easier. There were efforts to standardize policy enforcement, particularly in terms of fair competition between private companies and state-owned enterprises. The state tried to rein in the tax authority of local governments. The state also tried to restrict local protectionism. All of these has success to a certain degree. And we know that Chinese government has done anti-corruption campaigns, waves and waves of them, to try to reduce economic predation of business. And on the side of the private sector, they also made an effort to reach a good state-business relations in China, another large body of work. So private entrepreneurs in China are known to build ties with important government figures. They would join the Communist Party, become part of the political establishment. There's a whole literature called the Red Capitalist on the state-business relations. The entrepreneurs often would join government bodies and representative institutions like the People's Congress of China, and then they will form business alliances and coalitions among themselves. And then, of course, there was also, corruption. In this whole process, it is argued that the private sector has become very much part of China's political economy and found a very mutually beneficial way to coexist with the Chinese state. However, we do see news like the following show up every other few years. So what I'm going to show you is the most recent wave starting from 2022. These are all news headlines. So for example, you will see China started to clamp down on tech sector, education, real estate, all of them over and over again starting from around 2022. So you see all of these crackdown news, and then you see party first, business second started to become the consensus. And then you will see that entrepreneurs, the famous ones, started to get into personal trouble with the state. So for a while, people start to wonder, academics, China watchers, that what are we seeing here? Why do we have so many high profile crackdowns on private sector? Is the CCP changing its attitude towards the private sector? And then some will claim that it probably is. It's reflecting a change in Chinese politics, which is power is now more centralized. And then maybe Xi Jinping personally wants to bring China back to more of a state authoritarian capitalism kind of model. However, this kind of claim must be read together with what the Chinese government says, right, while all of this crackdown was happening. So for example, the government will come out and say, we are reshaping, not choking private business. China's premier will try to reassure the private sector after every wave of crackdown that there's no concern about future. Private economy is always a stable part of the Chinese market economy. We will have Xi Jinping himself every year almost come out to have a talk about private economy 2018, 2023, 2025, and between, and reinstate that private economy is an essential component of China's market economy. CCP is not turning back. Instead, actually, this very year, we see that Chinese government passed a new law to promote private economy, and then there's a new government office being established right now to promote private investment. And so, what is going on here with all of these high-profile conflict between the state and business? And is this actually a new phenomenon in China? So based on my open source research, I realized that this is actually nothing new. This is a repeat of what has been happening since China's 1978 economic reform. So state encroachment, or say crackdown, into the private sector has been a pretty constant pattern in China's political economy model. Before 1993, so 1978, China's economic reform started at the end of that year. And then very quickly, 1982 and 1989, twice, Deng Xiaoping himself, right, the so-called designer of China's market economy reform, himself will come out and say, actually, private sector, the entire private economy is becoming too strong. These private entrepreneurs, we got to be careful about them. They might become, political engine of a regime change. So he himself directed 2 waves of clampdown on the entire private economy. And then Deng will reverse course. So for example, the last time he reversed course was 1992, the famous Southern tour. He will go to the South and say, in fact, we need to write this into China's constitution, that private economy is part of China's market economy. So 1993, this was officially in the constitution that China is a socialist market economy. Private sector is part of it. But after 1993, it did not stop the state from encroaching into the private sector. Instead, we start to see not just a nationwide pattern, but sectoral pattern. So we start to see the state governments, either local governments or the national government, at different locations, sometimes nationwide, goes down to encroach on multiple, over 25 different sectors over the years since 1993. And encroachment here has many forms. So for example, forced shareholder sales in these private companies, forced merger and acquisition with state-owned enterprises or local governments, arrest of entrepreneurs, shut down private companies, shut down an entire private sector. It takes a lot of forms on different sectors. And then a lot of times, After they do a crackdown on the private sector, encroach into it, they will reverse course years later and say, you know what, actually, we still want to make sure private investor faith is not damaged. So this piqued my interest. My research question for this book is to try to understand when and where does the Chinese party state encroach into the private sector, and why would they do that? So before I show you how I come up with this conclusion and the details, I'll give you a preview. The most important findings from this book is there are a lot of known reasons of why state encroaches into private sector, and these reasons hold in China. For example, economic predation. For example, when the government fails to regulate a sector, if they couldn't write complete contracts. For example, when a sector is nationally, strategically important to the state's security, there will be state encroachment. Those reasons stand in China. But I also discovered there's another reason that is understudied in the literature, which is the Chinese party state has been regularly, constantly politicizing firms. And once they start to politicize a sector or firms, this politicization itself became a source of instability in the state-business relations. And therefore, sometimes the outcome is what we see, which is crackdown on the private sector. So politicization here, I'm going to borrow Boyko, Schleifer, and Vishni's definition of what does it mean to have politicization of business. It is to have business pressured or bribed to bring their objectives in line with those of the politicians. And then what kind of politicization, what kind of political service does the party state wants firms to do in China? These are the typical ones that the literature either records or we have a lot of news article about. So for example, it is known that Chinese government officials go to business and say, help us out, give us money for office buying so that we get promotion, right? Business also provides employment. Sometimes companies, state-owned most of the time, sometimes private, will be asked to create excessive employment so that it could help the state stabilize the society in an unemployment crisis. There's also the better-known ones today, monitoring and surveillance of the public and important political actors so that the CCP will have a strong hold of the society. But there are two more. So this is what I introduce in the book. One of them is called, what I call in English, visibility projects. This term in Chinese could be 政绩工程. So visibility projects is a political service that individual government officials often ask the companies to provide. And then the second one is societal control for the state. So when there are protests, particularly against a certain project, business could be solicited by the state to help with, appeasing or suppressing a protest. Whenever we see the government solicits these political services from the companies, state-business relations start to change. But the direction of the change is different. Sometimes it's going to become state-business cooperation or state-business collusion. If the political services is in nature like a bribe, meaning it's government to a specific company, one-to-one exchange of service and exchange of benefits. But sometimes this political service will be more like regulations in nature, meaning the political service is solicited from an entire sector or entire geographic area of companies. In that case, no companies could actually distinguish itself, cannot differentiate itself and stand out and say, we're the hero in providing political services. And therefore, no single company could easily claim credit from the party state. When that happens, what we constantly see is then state-business relations becomes sour. Companies feel like we're not reciprocated, we don't get benefits, and the state continues to ask for these political services, and then we see bad outcomes happen after that. But we'll talk about this in more specifics. So I'll show you a little bit next about the research design, and then after that, I'm going to introduce you these political services that I find in China, and I'll focus on one of them, visibility projects. So research design. This is the question I am interested in, but I need to operationalize it. So when I operationalize this question, I turn encroachment into deprivatization, and the forced one, meaning involuntary exit of an entire private sector in China. So I focus on this phenomenon. That's my outcome variable. I would like to understand, when do we see a government in China, local governments or national governments, force an entire sector to be deprivatized or nationalized? So by deprivatization here, I mean a state-initiated process. It needs to be explicitly stated to be state-initiated to have government or SOEs to procure all the private firms in the sector. This will be the most extreme form of state encroachment. And then to understand this outcome, I'm going to leverage 3 pairs of comparison. One of them is sectoral. So I have 2 sectors as my case studies in the book. One of them is urban bus in Chinese cities, and the other is solid waste treatment, in particular waste incineration services in the cities. Both sectors experienced very intense politicization since early 2000s, but then the outcome are drastically different. The urban bus sector, the red line is showing you how many cities in China still have any private company supplying this service. We can see that it peaked in 2006, many private companies in the sector. Today, the percentage is down below 20%. But that is not the case in solid waste treatment sector. Private companies' share in this sector steadily and continue to grow. So that's sectoral variation. And then I leverage local variation within each sector and temporal variation within each sector. And this is where I collect my evidence and data. So I did fieldwork in 15 Chinese cities between 2015 and 2019. The longest leg I stayed in China was 18 months at a time. And these are the cities that I went to, the 15 of them. So they also vary along geographic area, economic structure, population, wealth level, etc. And then I did 2 waves of over 200 interviews with 145 government officials and business people. And then I also collected the regional quantitative data for these 2 sectors. So that being said, let me tell you what I find. And I'm going to introduce you the first political service in my book, visibility projects. I'm going to spend more time on this because this is less intuitive compared to societal control. Before I tell you what visibility projects are, let me give you some examples. What you're looking at here is a wastewater treatment plant. Now, this is in a city with about 800,000 people. The capacity, though, of this wastewater treatment plant, this is not the only one. This is the 3rd one that they built. It's actually 5 times over capacity. So what you're seeing here is 20 sediment tanks. On a regular day, only 4 of them is going to be filled with wastewater. The others sit idle. This photo was taken when the provincial government came to inspect the wastewater treatment. So they filled it up with tap water. So this is wastewater treatment plant. Overcapacity, lifespan of this infrastructure, 40 years. But this city, in a very small city in China, population growth is extremely low. So in no way, in 40 years, that this city will have a large population to justify this capacity. In other words, this is a wastewater treatment plant built to run on a loss for its entire lifespan, unless something drastically happens in terms of demography. This is a second visibility project I would like to show you. This is a waste incineration plant and a recycling center. So all of these, by the way, are built by different companies. And this is a very interesting plant because they hired a European designer firm to design the outside, the entire plan of it. It looks extremely impressive. It's huge in size. However, because so much of the cost went to the designer firm to build the exterior to make it look impressive, what they do not have as a recycling center is the solid waste separation facilities. Now, this is actually key to have meaningful recycling and incineration. You have to separate out paper, glass, plastic, and metal, right, before they can be sent to recycle. You don't want to burn them. And so this is basically a waste incineration plant with a look, but the function is compromised. And then this is another project that I would like to show you. This is the world's longest bay bridge. I think there's another bridge that's being built now. Maybe we'll challenge this bridge. This bridge is in Qingdao, Jiaozhou Bay. So here's the story about this bridge. 2006, they have this new ambitious mayor, Du Shicheng. Eventually, it came down in corruption. And Du looked at Qingdao. He was there. He said, okay, we need something big in terms of urban planning. He said, look at the city. This city sits around a bay. It hugs a bay. That will mean the 2 areas on both sides of the bay have difficulty reaching each other, right? They have to drive a long time. So Du said, actually, let's build something on this bay. He said, I want a bridge. Everybody else in the government and expert panels, engineers told him that bridge is a bad idea. What we should do is an undersea tunnel. The reason is this bridge is going to be unnecessarily long to stay away from the bay inlet. And this is a northern city in China. There's a lot of hazardous weather conditions in the winter, snow, wind, ice. You build this bridge, then throughout 4 to 5 months of winter months, no one is going to use the bridge. It's too risky. So why don't we build a tunnel? And the tunnel is going to be so much shorter than the bridge because the tunnel could lie right there on the bay inlet. It's going to be 1/3 of the length, cheaper. Du said, no, I absolutely want the bridge. The issue with tunnel is it's invisible. So he started to build the bridge, and then later he realized everybody was right. So he said, let's also build a tunnel. So in this city now, you have 2 ways to cross the bay. You have a bridge that is rarely used. You have a tunnel that everybody else used. CCP later, because this official went down, right, in corruption, so they published a huge, book length of report on what is wrong with this official. Other than corruption, they mentioned this bridge. They said, look, when he built this bridge, he wasted so much money. He was not thinking about practicality. It's not actually used by the Qingdao citizens. What we only need was a tunnel. He was building it thinking about his career, thinking about how he could get attention. So basically what CCP is saying here, without using the term, is that that bridge is a visibility project. So visibility projects are projects that prioritize appearance and scale over practicality, cost effectiveness, and sustainability. It's not that none of them will have any practicality. There are probably some visibility projects will have it, but that is not a priority. The cost in the visibility projects will primarily go to the look and the scale of it over other functions. The goal of this kind of visibility projects is to enhance the project initiator's political visibility and reputation in the system. In this case, Chinese party state, so that they get noticed by the superior, so that they have a better chance in career advancement. Now, that being said, the natural question that follows is, why do they even need visibility projects? China is known to have a very strict selection institution to pick local officials and to promote them. Why do they need to do this extra work? So here's a little bit background to understand the institutions and its problems in terms of incentivizing local government officials in China. Every Chinese official, every level of it, are subject to an annual evaluation. And in this annual evaluation, there are 2 key components that every official gets evaluated by. One is loyalty. So this is basically your boss, the party committee above you, give you an annual written review, totally subjective, to say, this guy is good, he told the party line, he didn't do anything to hurt the party's interest. Loyalty. The second part of the evaluation is to evaluate these government officials' competence. Now, CCP understands that in authoritarian state, right? It's because loyalty is so difficult, so important to the authoritarian state, it's hard to get the most competent people because we know this classic dictator's trade-off, right? Loyalty and competence are 2 qualities that don't always go together, particularly at the high level. You think about what does it mean to have a loyal subordinate? That would mean this person would need to be certain, to a certain degree, blind about what you're doing. The boss, right, has to be able to tolerate a wrong decision made by the boss, has to be able to know that this might not be the best option in terms of public policy, but I'm going to still support it. So you have to have a certain degree of blindness to your superior. What is competence though? Competence is somebody who can see things clearly. They know what is going wrong. They know what is a suboptimal option, and there are better options out there. Now, being a competent person in this kind of system would mean you're competent. You might be able to do things better, and you might be able to attract political supporters around you. Now, that is a threat to authoritarian state, right? So we say in authoritarian state, this classic dictator's trade-off dictates that these qualities don't always go together. Now, how does CCP solve this problem? CCP says we want both. We measure loyalty subjectively, and this is how we measure competence. So this is a quantitative evaluation table I'm showing you here, straight from Chinese local government records. So you will have, the party state will say, in the next year, we have this long Excel file, by the way. We'll have 100-something policy targets set for all of the local government officials. So say you're a mayor, you receive a city-level evaluation table, and you have 100 of them. It will say, per capita income, you have to reach this target in another year. GDP growth, you have to reach this target in a year. Go do it. And then we're going to measure you quantitatively, and then we know who is the most competent. And then we compare all of these evaluation results. At the end of the year, we combine these evaluation results. We promote both the loyal and the most competent. So this is how CCP tried to solve this dictator's trade-off issue. Now, the problem with the system. So by the way, these evaluations have very profound personal implications. They are not just used to, incentivize an organization, like in a company or say in the Western government. They are directly tied to every government official's career, your promotion, your demotion, are you going to be moved somewhere else? And it is tied to every single government official's salary and bonus. These are serious. You want to do well in these two fronts, right? But here's the problem. Can you really combine them? When you have a subjective evaluation on loyalty, it is subjective. What is loyalty? How does, say, if you're a local government official, you're supposed to be loyal to the party state. What does that mean to you? What do you need to do? What do you not need to do? What if it all boils down to, this is just simply about if my boss likes me, right? It's very difficult to grasp how to show your loyalty. And then in terms of competence, this is a universal problem of using quantitative evaluation and tie it to individual outcomes. When you do that, people are going to cook the numbers, people are going to game the system because there's too much to lose. And indeed, we have evidence, not just from academics, but Chinese government itself, publishing all of the data fabrication, moral hazard gaming induced in the system. So in other words, to the local officials, they now are very disillusioned about the quantitative competence part. They're like, actually, everybody is trying to, so many people are manipulating it. Doing well in this system doesn't really help you stand out. It's not enough. Everyone seems to be doing pretty well in the competence evaluation. And we don't know what loyalty really means, whether we are evaluated as loyal or not. The outcome is high level of anxiety and uncertainty among Chinese local government officials. So here are two of the many quotes I get. One of them said, the evaluation system is serious, but there is a lot of art in making your numbers pretty. It is art. And then he went on to talk about how nobody really takes the system very seriously. And then the second official said, why do you think Buddhism and fortune telling are so popular among Chinese officials? Which is totally true. So by the way, fortune telling now in China is quite a prosperous industry. People pay a lot of money for good fortune tellers. A lot of them are government clients. So this is a level of anxiety that you have in a system where you don't know, how can I show my competence and loyalty at the same time? So what do? We have hyper competition and hyper reaction with all of these government officials in China who try to stand out in the system. So we have literature documenting some measures. For example, office buying. You go bribe the party committee, you bribe your boss to get a promotion. Or you go sing praises to your boss. You openly show that we're loyal and we love our party committee, right? A level above us. Those are recorded measures. But what I find is these anxious, insecure local government officials, they also launch visibility projects. And visibility projects is actually quite perfect to both showcase competence and to demonstrate loyalty. And I'll tell you why. 4 features of visibility projects to separate them from other types of public projects in China. So this is one type of projects, by the way. You will also have real development projects. You will have rent-seeking projects, right? You will have all of them. Visibility projects is a special type of projects. It has 4 features. 1, it's overdoing your job. It is not required of you. It is the kind of project that you go beyond the job requirement and say, I'm going to do extra. I'm going to do more. So this is very different from being performative. It is not a performance. Performance here is when we cannot do things, we must conceal our incompetence. So let's put on an act. Let's pretend we're doing things. This is the opposite. This is saying we are competent, we can do things, we're going to overdo it. So this is the first feature. Second feature, where do these projects show up? Visibility projects show up as a response to ambiguous and usually new party state directives. So the party state thinks about where China should go, right? In the 2000s, they say environmental quality is an important thing. Clean air, clean water, clean soil. Now they're saying technology, self-independence, right? Security. So let's do AI, robotics, all of these, right? Party state has its development agenda. the best place to have visibility projects to local government officials is to seize that ambiguous new policy agenda when the party state doesn't yet know how to do them. The party state says, we have a goal, but we don't know how to get there yet. That is your window, because then you are allowed to be creative. And even if you do things a little differently, you are not going to be suspected of disloyalty to the party state. You're just experimenting. So a lot of the times they're born out of ambiguous policy directives. These projects also prioritize top-down demands over bottom-up demands. Now, I'll show you some example here, but let me just quickly say, in a Chinese society, right, in the authoritarian party state, sometimes what the party state wants is the same as what the public wants, sometimes. Other times, what the party state wants is not what the public wants. Particularly now, let's think about how huge this country is and heterogeneous this country is, right? Local demands are gonna vary. Party state has very clear nationwide policy directives. So top-down and bottom-up demands in this country, sometimes they align. Then visibility projects caters to both the party state and the public. Best news. But when they do not align, focusing your energy and resources on visibility projects usually means opportunity cost for the public. You're letting go of money that you could have spent on local demand. So this is one feature of visibility projects. So when we see a project that is in there, in a place, but not really suitable, it's a little strange for locality, we probably think, is this a visibility project or is this actually a developmental project? And then at last, this is more of an ex post evaluation. They're usually quickly launched and they're usually short-lived. Now, quickly launched because local government officials have a very narrow time window to show that we are competent. So they want things done quickly. They need to see that result quickly. Short-lived because these projects were launched to get credit, right? If you get promoted, you don't need to maintain these projects anymore. Your successor comes in, but the successor cannot claim credit from the predecessor's project. So the successor have no incentive to maintain them as well. So a lot of times you will see these projects quickly launched and then short-lived. So let me show you more examples to put all of these features into details. This is a solar farm. This is a very special solar farm. Anyone can tell what a solar farm is? In what shape is it? It's a giant panda. So this is one of the largest solar farms in China, 248 acres. But hey, being big itself does not help you stand out. You want people to remember there's a large solar farm. This is responding to renewable energy national directive. It's not only large, it's in the shape of a panda, right? This is relatively harmless, right? The public wouldn't really mind that. Now, here's a second visibility project. This is a forestation project in northwest China. It started in 2005. So starting from 2003, party state says, we have a problem in northwest. Desertification. Desert is eating into northeast. We must stop it. So the party state told local governments and say, let's have forest. Let's have a reforestation project. Now, as a local government official, you start to wonder, okay, let's have a forest. What kind of forest? Now, the natural plants for this kind of place, desert, will be very low, unimpressive, shrubs and bushes, right? And the local officials say, well, that is not impressive enough. That's actually pretty messy. What are we going to do instead for a forestation project is poplar trees. Now, here's something about poplar trees. These are the fastest growing trees in the entire world. You plant a poplar seedling, in 2 years, you get a full-size poplar tree, really tall. So it will be very easy in a short time to show the full scale of forest. But two issues about poplar. One, they are extremely water hungry. They are like your wrong tree for the desert. If you have a poplar forest there, that means irrigation and water resource is really needed. Two, poplar trees is particularly susceptible to pest and disease. So you don't want to do monoculture. When you do poplar, you want to have other kind of plants around them. But to the local official, the important thing here is we need to show scale. We need to show the look. This will be our career promoting project. So this very local official says, poplar and poplar only. He got promoted, he left, and these are water hungry trees. Successor came in and say, why would we maintain poplar? They're so expensive. 2010, look at what it has become. So by the way, this is entirely exposed by Chinese national government. So this is on all of the official news. And then you will have this kind of visibility projects This is new. Visibility projects, by the way, it's like fashion. There are like generations of it. So today, the Chinese government says, we want, right, robotics, we want technology. And then you have the city. This is a city in southwest China. They really are not the perfect city for robotics. They don't have a lot of highly educated engineers. They don't have a lot of infrastructure to support this kind of technology and industry. They are kind of far away logistically. But they still want to engage with this vague policy directive. It's a great opportunity to stand out. So what do? You build a park. You call this park a robotics park. And then you have the world's largest transformer sculpture right here. Much larger than our neighbor, our fellow professor's transformers. Look at how small the people will be here. And then you say, this is actually a sign, a signal we send to the center that we're going to take this seriously. We're going to eventually attract companies to this robot park. Right, so these are all visibility projects and how they play out. Now, this is a state business relation book, right? Where are the firms? Why are we talking about visibility projects? It turns out, for many of these visibility projects, government officials would say, we're trying to claim credit here, but we have to be sure we also look loyal, right? Part of the disloyalty to the party state is you're wasting the party state's money. So the local government officials will say, who should pay for these visibility projects? Firms. So they will go to state-owned enterprise, they will go to private companies, they will say, do us a favor, build us a visibility project. Firms oftentimes bear the cost of this political service. Now, firms have a very complicated feeling about political services. Think about as a firm, you want to have good relation with the party state in China, right? Because we know in this country it's rule by law, it's not quite rule of law. You want that good relation, but how do you build that good relation? Traditional approaches, right? You can go bribe the government. You can do everything that we just said at the beginning of this talk, right? Informally, formally build a good relationship with them. Political service will be the worst option because firms have no choice over the cost of the project, the timing of the project, or even to whom this project is benefiting. Firms have very little control over them. So this is not the most efficient way for any company to build good relationship with the government. So they have a complicated feeling about these projects. And because visibility projects by nature is about scale and look, not practicality or sustainability, right? It is by nature wasteful. It's very difficult for firms to recoup this kind of cost. So now it comes down to, what is the nature of the visibility projects? This is the state business negotiations. If the business solicited, to provide visibility project can differentiate itself. If it's the only company providing this kind of project, it has a better position to negotiate with the government and say, we're doing you a favor. Without us, right, you can't find some other people to do it. Pay us back. Better news for the firms. However, if visibility projects is required of an entire sector, all firms in a sector have to, contribute to one visibility project, then no firm could come out, differentiate themselves from the others. Bad deal for them. That's regulation. That's just taking money out of them. In that case, you will see state-business relations drastically deteriorate. So let me show you this latter case with empirics. This will be urban buses, one of my sectors in the book. This very mundane, like foot soldier of urban life kind of sector did not become like the center of attention until 2002. 2002, national government started to say, we need clean air. This country's environmental degradation is really not, going well. Clean air, go around, be creative, policy experiments. Now, one thing the national government did realize is part of the issue is private cars, too much exhaust, and this was back in 2002. And local government officials said, understood, we're going to develop our public transportation. We're going to incentivize people, citizens, to take buses instead of driving. And then what happened is a bunch of visibility projects in this sector. One of them is quite simple and low cost. It's beautification projects. This is when the government, local government says, we are responding to clean air. We are going to develop our urban bus sector. So we're going to apply for city titles. National civilized city, national public transportation city. These are national government's awards to local governments who did a great job in developing urban bus or subway. Now, what do you do to win a title? Beautification of the buses. You wash them, you repaint them, If a bus company have different looking buses, make sure they switch out the bus fleet so they look the same, consistent. Get rid of advertisement, right? Drive well, relatively low cost. And winning this title is a very important line on the leader's resume. So this is the first project that started to ensue after the Clean Air Initiative. Second project is the government go to bus companies and say, you need to buy new, impressive buses. Now, in the bus sector, usually, local governments sign a contract 8 to 10 years with a bus company. And the bus, a regular bus, the lifespan is 10 years. So this contract will say you need to have all of these many buses. You don't need to change your bus within 10 years, as long as they're still operating. Visibility project is the government comes in and say, sorry, we know that there's only 5 years on your contract and your buses are all fine, but we need to now do something in urban bus sector. We need you to buy new buses in your bus fleet or completely replace your bus fleet so they reflect our thinking. So there are three types of them. New energy buses, cleaner energy, high capacity buses, holds more passengers, and aesthetically pleasing buses. So I'll show you 2 examples of what came about in this whole new bus revolution. This is renewable energy bus. It runs on LPG rather than traditional fuel. Back in 2000s, it was not yet a great idea because a lot of the engines were not compatible with LPG. Today, this is a mature model. So this is actually one of the examples of visibility projects morph into real development projects as technology improves. This project is a straddling bus. It's a fun bus. This is huge. So the bus body is all on the top level. The top level of a straddling bus can hold 800 passengers at a time. And then the belly, it has a hollow belly to allow other small cars to go under this bus, drive through the bus. So this was pushed in a northern Chinese city. It looks great, impressive, high capacity, everything. It has a small hiccup. It cannot make any turns. And then it has other hiccup. Once a small car gets trapped under the straddling bus, how can it come out? What if it needs to change a lane? And then it has yet a third hiccup. There are a lot of bridges and passes already in the city. This is a huge bus. It can never get under a small bridge. And so within announcing this bus, 2 months later, they abolished this plan. So this is another kind of project that you can, just to show you what's going on in the bus sector. It was very happening for many years. And then the third project is BRT system. So bus rapid transit system. This is actually quite a mature concept in urban planning, starting from Latin America. This is enclosed, dedicated bus lanes with priority to buses at intersections. Washington, D.C. has them. Boston has them, right? So it looks like this. Now, here's the issue though. BRT, when you do it right, when you do it with careful planning, it's a good idea. The key is you have to do it right. It's very complicated. You're disrupting the existing road system in your city. You're designing new intersections. You're thinking about when do bus and cars merge lanes, right? How does it go? Very But in China, 23 cities launched BRT systems. 14 of them reported worse traffic congestion after they built the BRT. 5 cities eventually demolished the BRT within 1 to 2 years. The reason? Guess how long does it take for any Chinese city, and these are all big cities, to plan and build a BRT system? Between 8 months and a year. Extraordinarily fast. Now compare that to a city like Bogota or Lima. How long did they take to build a BRT system? Construction alone, over 3 years. Planning, many more years before that. This is the issue. BRT essentially in China, a lot of them became a visibility project for government official credit claiming. So scale was the key. Practicality and sustainability was sacrificed in this process. Now, the fun thing is, as the Chinese bus sector was getting busy, all of these new projects were launched. Deprivatization started to happen. So we started to see that with the peak of visibility projects, they start to grow. Private companies start to exit. And this is not a voluntary exit. Private companies were kicked out by city governments all over China. So based on my measurement, so I measured this outcome, right? It was my outcome of interest, deprivatization. It is state-initiated process to procure all the private firms in an urban bus sector. Some language, so I only quote government documents or official news that announces something like, the following will be an average sentence. Local government says, private bus companies are no longer suitable for our urban planning or public transportation demand. So the government has decided to deprivatize them, nationalize them, take them back under government control, have them merge with SOEs, all of this language. Now, when I see this kind of language, this is your strictest sense of deprivatization, right? It's not voluntary exit of one company, it's all the private bus companies have to leave. I call that as deprivatization. And that happened in over 81% of my sample of 280 cities. That's how common it was to deprivatize. So let's see, what is the relationship between visibility projects in the sector and private companies' exit? I'm going to use survival analysis. I will spare you the detail, but basically in this analysis, I try to estimate how long does it take for private sector to go down when visibility projects start to rise. So I'll show you some very intuitive results. We don't need to go into this. The three major types of visibility projects, this is how they affect the outcome of deprivatization. Statistically significant, the actual margin effect is really large. So once you launch them, the probability of deprivatization in the sector really increases. And then this is also a fun one. There's a dosage effect. It also depends on how frequently and how many visibility projects that the city launched within a certain time frame. So here you will have, if they launch 0 visibility projects in the sector in 3 years, you will see that private sector stays alive, most of them, right? Eventually, naturally, 15 years pass, some of them exit. But if this city is aggressive, really ambitious leader, they launch 5 projects every year. This is the last line, the red line you see here. Look at that. Within 5 years, if you launch visibility projects this aggressively, deprivatization will happen. So this is the relationship. So I wonder, okay, what is the mechanism? So I went in the book, I'm going to have like detailed case comparison, process tracing, different cities comparison. But I will spare you that, and I'll just tell you on average, this is how it happens. In this sector, visibility projects is like a regulation. If you want to show achievement in the sector, you need all bus companies. And in China, the number on average is 8 companies in each city. You need all of them to work with you. So the government will go to them and say, please contribute. All the bus companies then will initially agree. They know their business success depends on the government. They worry about losing their contract with the government, etc. They will all agree. And then the government will go on and say, we want more visibility projects. One is not enough. Now, costs are rising. All the companies are contributing to them, right? They have to beautify their bus. They have to buy new buses before the contract reaches. In the BRT case, they're also losing income. They're basically giving out their most profitable bus routes to the government. So firms start to resist. They're going to protest. In some cases, they're going to sue the government to court. And private company in particular will resist because they have a hard budget constraint. They don't have unlimited budget. State-owned enterprise will also voice weak resistance, but they could be bailed out. And then the government will use coercion. Now, very common form of coercion includes tax law violations. Frankly, it's not that difficult also to find these violations. Traffic law violations, right? Bus licenses that have expired but not renewed, environmental standards, you name it. Government will say, okay, because of all of these reasons, we're going to suspend your business. No operation, lose money. And then bus firms will say, okay, fine, then we will, sorry about the slides, I don't know what's going on here. Private firms will resist again. So they will say, okay, fine, we're going to continue, but then eventually the cost will really break their back too much. They can't afford it anymore. And then private firms resist. And the second wave of resistance is usually quite fierce. This will be sabotaging efforts of visibility projects. Government official will say, we really need these projects, for our promotion next year in 2 years, and then they will deprivatize these resisting private firms. So this is basically the storyline of how a political service like visibility projects, which is in nature like a regulation, lead to state-business relationship deterioration in this sector. However, not all the political services will lead to such an outcome. Sometimes when the political service is like a bribe, you will see the relationship rather stable or even become better. So we don't have time actually for societal control. Let me just very quickly describe what I'm saying here. basically what I find is in sectors where projects are sensitive, your PX chemicals, right? All sorts of toxic factories, manufacturing, waste incineration, you have protests against these projects. NIMBY movement, not in my backyard. When you have this kind of protest happen, government wants to suppress or appease the protest, right? But they don't do it alone. They ask the companies to contribute. So companies here are directly supplying money, supplying manpower on the street to deal with protesters. However, the interesting thing I find is, based on business ownership type, what they can provide to the government is different. Private firms are extremely good to use to appease protesters. This is a photo of waste incineration plant managers, local government officials, and protester leaders sit together, discuss what's the matter with incineration, how can you improve, etc. State-owned enterprises, particularly the large and powerful ones, central and provincial level, they are extremely good to play the ally role for local government in China. What that means is they will bring in political support from the top, and then they are going to provide justification for violent suppression. So what happened is, so the reason, by the way, that private companies are good scapegoats is because how do you appease protesters? The first step is usually to punish the company. It's usually say, yes, they did not burn their garbage at 800 Celsius degree, they burned them at 400. We're going to shut them down, order reorganization. We're going to fine them. We're going to fine them big, and then the money, some of it will go to the public. State-owned enterprises usually resist doing that for local governments. State-owned enterprises in China actually, a lot of the times, have an equal and sometimes dominating position in political negotiations with local governments. Private companies, however big a company you are, you could be Alibaba, you don't have that position with a local government. So local government use private companies for appeasement, use state-owned enterprise for suppression. Now this is the interesting thing. When they build the waste incineration plants, they look at their own history, they look at the neighbors, they're like, here's our prediction. We're going to have moderate level of protest, we can appease them. Then they will prefer to work with a private firm. If they say our history and our neighbors' history tell us that people here will have large-scale protests, then we're going to actually work with the SOE. We're going to let SOEs in, introduce new companies, etc. Now, both companies provide different roles, and this political service is a bribe in nature. It's one company helping our government. So the government usually reciprocates the company after protest is done. The reciprocation here is a concern for sustainable development in China. Reciprocation here is basically the government says, we might give you subsidies, companies, and we might turn a blind eye to your cost-saving measures. In this industry, that will mean not burn the waste at the right temperature, so dioxin will be released. So unfortunately, because of time limit, that's all I can tell you. In the book, there are way more details. But let me finish this talk with a few concluding thoughts. Basically, what I find is that politicization of business in these forms and other forms I described has been a constant feature of China's political economy model. And this is not a service that firms prefer. Firms prefer bribery. Firms prefer, getting integrated with the polity rather than being asked to provide political services. And the reason that we have this need for politicization of business in the Chinese context is that, one, there is demand for it. Local government officials, they need to be able to claim credit and avoid blame. Avoid blame is a huge political factor incentive in the Chinese system. So you don't look disloyal or incompetent, right? So companies come in to share that blame part a lot of the times. And then the local government officials are allowed to do that because the party state in China has always left this window open. They have been curbing economic predation for sure, but they have not curbed political predation because this goes back to all of the theory about democratization and bourgeoisie and so on. Capitalist entrepreneurs, they are rich, they are organized, and there are many of them. So in every law about private economy, including constitution in China, party would say, they're an integral part of our economy, we always support them, but the private sector needs to remain political sensible. The private sector needs to serve the party's interest, and the private sector needs to serve the public interest. That is leaving a window for these government officials to politicize firms, and so they do because it benefits them. And therefore, the implication here is when we think about China's political economy, this is a concern about one, how will private investors look at this environment? In all of these, a lot of these sectors, once they are politicized, we see private firms exit, government try to get them back, and then they're reluctant to come back. And two, if the state-business relation turn into collusion thanks to political service provision, then we worry about development outcomes. We worry about a healthy market economy in establishment. So that is the final few thoughts that I will share with you. And I will end this talk with the quote that I used to start this entire book, the first quote in the book. This is a party study session in 2015. The party taught all of these party members that economy is secondary to politics in this country. We will give up economic growth without hesitation for political needs. So I'll just end my talk here. Sorry, it went a bit long. Thank you so much for your patience.